Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. This webinar will begin in a few minutes. The title of the webinar is Global Status of Renewable Energy 2017. Over 450 people have registered for this webinar from all around the world. My name is Joanna Costello. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary at the International Solar Energy Society, ISIS. Our headquarters are in Freiburg, Germany. That is where I am joining you this morning. I will take you through a very short introduction and also moderate the Q&A session. Today's webinar will focus on two recently published reports by REN21, the Global Status of Renewable Energy 2017 and the Global Futures Report. Both reports are available to download for free on the REN21 website. The links are available in the panelist speakers' presentations themselves and also on the ISIS website's webinar page. Before we begin with the webinar presentations, I would like to inform you about what ISIS is and stands for. The International Solar Energy Society, ISIS, is a non-profit UN-accredited membership NGO. The ISIS vision is to achieve 100% renewable energy for all, used efficiently and wisely. We represent a diverse membership of academics, researchers, energy practitioners, consultants, students, businesses, and advocates. ISIS works together with like-minded organizations from countries around the world to advance the renewable energy transformation. By becoming a member of ISIS, you are supporting the 100% renewable energy movement. Please check out our websites at www.ises.org. That's our main homepage, and our membership page is join.isis.org. The presentations and the recording of this webinar will be available on the ISIS website for ISIS members. Please log in to the website www.ises.org with your email address and the password. If you're on our mailing list, then you have access to this to view the presentations and the recording of this webinar. If you're not a member, please visit our website and also our membership page, and I encourage you to sign up. The recording of this webinar will also be freely available on the ISIS YouTube channel. We hope to address as many questions as we can from you, the webinar audience. You are welcome and encouraged to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar. In fact, we have dedicated a lot of time within the space of this webinar and the agenda for your questions. To ask a question, select the questions pane on your screen and type in your question. Please specify who your question is directed to. Questions will be addressed after all the presentations in a moderated Q&A session. We would also like to encourage you to use the ISIS discussion forum on LinkedIn to continue the Q&A and the discussion even after the webinar has ended. I now have the honor of introducing our first speaker, Christine Linz. Christine Linz was appointed as Executive Secretary of REN21, the Renewable Energy Policy Network of the 21st Century, in July 2011. Between 2001 and 2011, she served as Secretary General of the European Renewable Energy Council, the united voice of Europe's renewable energy industry, in Brussels. Previously, she worked in a regional energy agency in Austria, promoting energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. She has a master's degree in international economics and holds more than 20 years of work experience in the field of renewable energy and energy efficiency. Christine also regularly speaks at ISIS conferences and webinars, and it is always a pleasure to work together with her. Christine, the floor is now yours for your presentation.
So sorry, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, Joanna, for the small hiccup, but I think now we are all set, and I'm going to take you in a nutshell through the main findings of this year's Renewables Global Status Report. It contains an overview of market, industry, policy, investment trends in renewable energy in all technologies, electricity, heating, cooling, and transport, And for the first time this year, we have a section on enabling technologies and energy system integration, as we see that these areas are becoming more important. And we have a feature which talks about deconstructing baseload, because we see that with high shares of variable renewables, baseload is becoming less and less important. If I can have the next slide, please. Or maybe I can do that myself. I don't think so.
Yes, you can do that yourself. You're sharing your screen at the moment.
Excellent. Okay. This report is possible through the contribution of over 800 contributors and reviewers from all around the world. We track renewable energy progress in 155 countries. We cover 96% of global GDP and global population. And if you're not yet member of this illustrious network, please join. It is open, and we are always privileged to welcome new members. All the information and the graphics and the data that are used for producing the Renewables Global Status Report are available from the Renewables Interactive Map. So, in a nutshell, 2016 was another extraordinary year for renewable energy. There was investors were able to get more for their money. Investment was down, but installed capacity reached a record of 161 gigawatts of installed capacity. That is an increase 9% compared to 2015. We have seen that solar PV was responsible for 47% of newly installed renewable power capacity, 34% wind, and about 16% in hydro. So, all very positive. However, when we look at the share of renewable energy in final energy consumption, we see that the share is only advancing slowly. We now, at the end of 2015, that's the latest demand data that we have available, about renewables provided about 19.3% of share of global final energy consumption. Why does the progress in the power sector, why is that not reflected in the overall picture? It's first of all because effectively power only comprises a small share. We have a much higher share of final energy consumption is used to produce heat and cooling, where progress in renewable energy is slow, and also transport plays an important role. And secondly, of course, energy demand is continuing to grow. That also somehow reduces the absolute impact of renewable energy that we see today. When we look at the list of the champion countries, as far as renewables are concerned, in absolute terms, this reads China, United States, United Kingdom, Japan, Germany. However, when you look at investment in renewable power and fuels per unit of GDP, you see that developing countries are in the forefront, with Bolivia, Senegal, Jordan, Honduras, the first three, followed by Iceland. About 30% of the world's power generating capacity is nowadays renewables based, and 24.5% of global electricity demand is generated by renewables. Heating and cooling, as I mentioned before, much smaller. Only about 9% of total global heat demand is provided by modern renewable energy sources. However, there's vast opportunities to use biomass, solar thermal, and geothermal. The deployment in this sector has been slow, on the one hand, constrained by comparatively low fossil fuel prices, but also by a lack of policy support, which I'm going to illustrate in just a second. In transport, liquid biofuels provide around 4% of the world's road transport fuels. We have some advances in biogas, and we see that electrification of the transport sector is advancing. However, we often see that these electric transport policies are not necessarily connected to renewable energy support. On the other hand, we of course see that the linkage between electric mobility and integrating higher shares of variable renewables is a very positive one, because these EVs can then be used as storage. That's what I meant before. When you look at the situation, we have nearly global coverage of renewable energy policy targets. We have 126 countries in the world with power policies, 68 with transport, and 21 with policies in the field of heating and cooling. So much less in heating and cooling and transport than in the power sector, and that's something that needs to be changed. About 9.8 million people work in the renewable sector, a small increase compared to 2015. And we see that countries with stable policy frameworks are the ones benefiting most from the jobs created. I mentioned before, global investment was down. That's on the one hand, it is the result of reduced prices and costs that have really come down. On the other hand, we have seen that in some countries that recently introduced auctions, there were some delays, such as in South Africa, for example, that has reduced volumes, and the main reason for the reduction of investment is the reduction of investment in China and Japan. China last year, despite being the front runner in investment on a global scale, reduced its investment because in renewable technologies it invested more in the grid in order to make the grid really enable the grid to take up high shares of variable renewables. For the fifth consecutive year, however, investment in renewable power was roughly double that in fossil fuels, so quite impressive. And then when you see where the money went, it was mainly solar and wind. The other technologies had more difficulty to find investors. The star performer of 2016 was again solar PV, with 75 gigawatts of capacity added, bringing the total solar PV capacity to 303 gigawatts. We see that now every continent has at least 1 gigawatt installed, and we have 24 countries with more than 1 gigawatt installed. China last year alone added 34.5 gigawatts, increasing its total solar PV capacity to 77.4 gigawatts. That's far more than any other country. And we also see that China last year nearly doubled its capacity. We see that grid-connected decentralized systems they are growing, but grid-connected centralized systems are growing much quicker, and therefore the progress that is made in off-grid is on the overall statistics relatively difficult to see. Just for the sake of completeness, I'm just briefly mentioning also the other solar technologies. We do, however, have very detailed statistics for biomass, geothermal, hydro, wind in the report, but I won't present them for the sake of time. We have 110 megawatts of capacity coming online in concentrating solar thermal power plants, which brings the total capacity up to 4.8 gigawatts. And we also track the progress in the field of solar thermal heating and cooling, where we see that this technology has been sold in at least 127 countries around the world, with again, however, a huge pole position of China, followed by Turkey, Brazil, and others, with significant market growth last year in Denmark, especially for solar thermal district heating systems, but also Mexico and in India. A last word on energy access. We still have about 1.2 billion people without access to electricity, and we see that solar off-grid systems are rapidly advancing. They have reached 8.1 million units worldwide, with highest sales in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in Eastern Africa. we see that pay-as-you-go solar companies have made a huge increase in their activity. They managed to raise 3 million investment in 2012. This amount increased to 223 million in 2016. So quite impressive. However, we see that still a lot needs to be done in order to reach energy access for all by 2030. I'm sorry. As I mentioned, this year the focus on for the first time on the global status report on enabling technologies, on system integration. We are starting to track the advancement of storage technologies. We see that grid-connected battery storage grew by 50% in 2016. We are also tracking progress in the field of electric mobility, electric vehicles, and we are providing showcases that it is possible to integrate high shares of variable renewables in power systems with countries such as Denmark, Germany, Uruguay, or the Cape Verdes already manage to operate a system without any problem that integrates between 20 and 40% of variable renewable energy. Of course, in such systems, baseload is becoming less important, and so very clearly the future energy system is going to be, needs to be smarter, more flexible. It will look into sector coupling, meaning coupling electricity, heating, cooling, and transport together, use more enabling technologies such as storage or heat pumps or electric vehicles. And overall, 2016 was a great year with global renewable transition advancing rapidly, with global record capacity additions due to falling costs. So more capacity was installed for less money. It was also the third year in a row where the emissions from the energy sector remained stable, while the global economy continued to grow by about 3%. So we reached a decoupling of economic growth and energy-related CO2 emissions. That's due to declining coal, especially in China, but also investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency. However, what we also notice is that progress is not fast enough to reach the Paris Agreement, so we need to do more. And that is also why REN21 earlier this year launched the Global Futures report that Sven is going to present, where we ask people what are going to be the key issues in the years to come that the energy sector is facing in order to reach such a transition to the Paris Agreement. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christine, for your excellent and very comprehensive presentation. To the audience, the presentation is available on that website that's now showing on your screen. The link is also on the ISIS webinar page, so do click on it and look through the report and all the infographics that are all available there from REN21. Christine, I have one question which I'd like to quickly ask you before we move on to the next presentation. And that's coming from somebody asking about small island development states, saying they are the most vulnerable to climate change and renewable energy can be a real solution there. Are there any reports or statistics that REN21 have available for the small island developing states?
Thanks for the question. We are currently discussing with UNIDO on developing a status report for the seed stocks for the small island development states in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, and also in the Indian Ocean and Africa. We are, in addition to the global status report, working also with other partners, especially with regional renewable energy and energy efficiency centers on the development of regional reports, because we think it is important to provide further detail of a region. If the participant has a detailed question for some of the islands, I can point out some work that was done by ARENA. ARENA did some work on islands, so there are statistics available. However, I agree there is a lot that needs to be done, and especially on the islands, what is important and what we are working right now with UNIDO is to come up with some analysis on how to foster local value creation for islands, because on the one hand they are very vulnerable, but on the other hand it's also important for them to generate income and to generate economic possibilities for the island population.
Thank you for your answer. There are a lot more questions coming in, but I'm going to save them for the Q&A session at the end and move straight to our next speaker. Thanks again, Christine. I would now like to introduce our second expert speaker, Dr. Sven Teske, who's joining us from Sydney, Australia today. Dr. Sven Teske is a research principal at the Institute for Sustainable Futures. He has 20 years of experience in technical analysis of renewable energy systems and market integration concepts. He's published over 50 special reports about renewable energies, like the Global 100% Renewable Energy Scenario Energy Revolution, a grid analysis for the Chinese province of Jiangsu in cooperation with the China State Grid Company, and a 100% renewable energy pathway for Australia. Since 2015, Sven worked on research projects for new business concepts for decentralized renewables, storage concepts for high renewable penetration in Australian power grids, development of high renewable energy pathways for G20 countries in an IEA IRENA project, and of course the REN21 Global Futures report, which is the report he will speak about today. Sven, thank you for joining us today all the way from Sydney, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and without further delay, I would like to start my presentation. We did a survey about the futures, Renewable Global Futures report, which is basically the logical extension of the global status report Christine just presented. So we asked about 114 experts around the world. We had conservative, we had moderate, and we had progressive experts in our survey, and we asked them about feasibility, about 100% renewable energy futures and macroeconomic impacts of such a future. We also covered all regions around the world, and we covered Africa, Australia, and Oceania, China, Europe, India, Japan, Latin America, and the Caribbean, North America, and also international experts organizations. In the analysis, we basically structured all our questions and answers, which were altogether about more than 100 questions. So each of the interviews took more than 1.5 hours. So there's a lot of material we actually gathered, and we can only publish a fraction of that. We structured the whole survey into 12 great debates. I have to say that these 12 great debates are in the tradition of the first Global Futures report, which has been done from Eric Martineau. And we try to fill his very large footsteps and try to sort of further develop that concept. So my presentation covers not all of the 12 great debates, which you see on the screen right now, but only those which are directly related to solar energy, although I'm aware of the fact that renewables in general, except geothermal, are all solar energy. So the first question basically, or conclusion is 100% renewables, is that actually a logical consequence of the Paris Agreement? We ask, is the transition therefore to 100% renewables on a global level feasible and realistic? And to our nice surprise, I have to say I didn't believe that, but 71% of all people agreed, of all experts agreed with the statement, which is actually quite encouraging, because if we would have asked that probably 10 years ago, we might get only 7.1%. So there is quite a lot in the move right now, which is really encouraging. Secondly, we ask what will be the share of global renewable energy, final energy consumption, so not only electricity, but final energy consumption by 2050. Again, and which is consistent with the first answer, 72% of the experts expect within the next 3 decades. So the conclusion is that from this first debate, all of the energy experts agreed that renewable energy deployment will continue to expand in the future and that the technical and economic potential of renewables are largely untapped. However, when asked about the likelihood of achieving that in 2050, there was no consensus. But I think in general, the pathway was clear. Furthermore, despite the fact that more than 2/3 of all experts interviewed considered 100% renewable energy future as feasible and realistic, some remain unconvinced that we actually need that, and is it necessary? So the first debate, we think, or first lessons learned from that is we actually need to have the debate that why 100% renewable is a logical consequence of the Paris Agreement, because this is not clear for many experts yet. I skipped the second great debate and go straight to the third one. The second one was related to energy efficiency, obviously very important, but I wanted to focus this presentation on solar. In terms of the power generation, we asked what will be the estimated development of global renewable power generation share by 2050. And again, 65% expect that renewable power generation will more than double within the next 30 years, which means that the global status reports in the future will hopefully always show an ever-increased market share of renewable, especially solar. And if you look at the graph, you see that even 41% of the experts believe that renewable electricity generation will be over 80% in only 30 years or 32 years, which is quite encouraging. We ask if decentralized power will dominate or more centralized generation by 2050. There was a fairly large group of people who said with 63% expect that decentralized generation will dominate over centralized plants. 21% disagreed with that, and 16% neither agree nor disagree, so that's still open. If I see the statistics from solar PV right now and also from wind and offshore wind, we see that renewables tend to go more in the large scale field. So I assume that this question will not be answered within the next 2 or 3 years, but for maybe another decade before we can actually clearly say who dominates. So as a conclusion and lessons learned from that question, the power sector is winning the race to a renewable energy future. That's pretty clear. Wind power is now among the cheapest. New power plant technologies and solar photovoltaics as well. Renewables significantly changed the way utilities operate over the past decade, or not operate if you see some examples of utilities who did not change yet their business model. Achieving 100% renewable energy systems will require a mix of many different technologies to cover the full range of needs, which means we should not only focus on solar PV and wind all the time, but also have in mind that other renewable technologies, like for example concentrated solar power, is extremely important to actually get a system going. So technologies also such as biomass, geothermal or hydro, even though are largely overshadowed, do have a rapid growth. A debate how to stimulate the growth of all renewable power generation technology is required to achieve a resilient power system. Again, we do need systems thinking if we move towards 100% renewables. But it seems to be clear that solar, PV and wind will dominate, and that all other renewable energies and energy efficiency technologies probably have to group around solar, PV and wind in order to achieve a very resilient and secure system. The fourth great debate is the future of heating, and we ask what will be the share of renewable heating energy consumption by 2050, and which I find really surprising. 78% expected the renewable heating share will at least triple within the next 30 years, even though right now we are hovering around 8%, and that's already quite some time. And the next very hot topic is the electrification of the heating sector the way to go, or and will it lead to an almost complete electrification, or will thermal systems, renewable thermal systems like solar collectors continue to dominate the heating sector? That race is still very open, because 39% agreed with the electrification thesis, but 41% disagreed with this thesis that everything goes towards electrification in the heating sector. 20% are still undecided, so I would say that the topic is wide open, and I would hope that the renewable energy community will move into that debate fairly quickly, because it is very important and it defines what kind of infrastructure we need. We do need policies for the heating sector, both in regards to demand and supply. And what's very important, and the debate is not very progressed right now, is the industrial process heat, which we need everywhere. And unlike heating of homes and offices, we are highly dependent on the climate conditions. I live in Australia, and we have in Australia a very high potential on concentrated solar power for industrial process heat, while my home country Germany has obviously no potential for industrial process heat from concentrated solar power. So there must be a variety of different technologies. So to conclude, different technology options require different infrastructures. District heating systems, which are now seem to take off in Denmark, power grid or gas pipeline distribution grid for hydrogen or renewable methane, all those different infrastructures are required. We need an urgent debate in the long term. Where do we want to go, and what technology pathway, because that actually defines the future infrastructure planning. And I do hope that I don't have to say anymore that renewable heating is a sleeping giant. It is a bit an unconscious giant, and I hope this will change very soon. The last great debate I would like to present is technology versus cost, which should come first. And we asked, in the coming decades, the price of oil per barrel over $100 is almost certain. So we asked, do you disagree or agree with that? And you see in this graph that basically the answer were distributed across the entire spectrum, which basically means nobody knows. So high uncertainty about the uncertainty. High certainty about the uncertainty of fossil fuel prices, so that was the only agreement, while we asked if the cost for renewables will continue to fall and will outpace all fossil fuels within the next 10 years. 67% of the experts around the world agreed with that statement, and that means that renewables are predictable and in terms of costs and price, and also very certain in the expert field. So the survey included many questions about future technology developments as well. Only 1/3 of all interviews completed this section, and therefore we could not publish the result. I have to say I'm a trained engineer, and I was a bit disappointed because I had very detailed question about how, for example, how experts see the future of AC or DC, what kind of offshore wind technology, is it floating or is it not floating, technologies they see as important for their region. Unfortunately, we couldn't really publish those results because many experts did not really answer that, which basically suggests that most of the energy thought leaders are focused on financial and political aspects of the energy sector, while only a minority is involved in debates about strategic technology assessment. And in order to find the most efficient and sustainable energy supply system, I think we also do need a dedicated technology debate. And the key questions for a strategic technology debate is which technology offers the most benefits for our specific application, and if the technology is currently expensive, how do we bring down the costs? Last but not least, scaling up investments and workforce. We ask what will the annual global investment volume in renewable energy be in 2050? 63% believe that the renewable energy investment volume will at least double. And in terms of employment, same thing. The majority believes that the workforce will double or even quadruple, which basically means that the majority of the experts believe that the renewable industry will have the same size in terms of workforce as the current car industry on a global level. And with that, I would like to conclude, because I ran out of time. We see that we have a lot of all the other great debates, very detailed, described in our publication. And in conclusion, more than 70% of the experts interviewed consider a global transition to 100% renewable energy to be both feasible and realistic, which is very encouraging. There's an overwhelming consensus that renewable power will dominate in the future, with many noting that even large international corporations are increasingly choosing renewable energy products, either from utilities or through direct investments. And numerous companies, regions, islands, and cities have set 100% renewable energy target, and are therefore quite often ahead of the political debate. I would like to conclude is what we need in the future is an informed debate about the energy future, so that that governments can adopt the right policy and financial incentive to accelerate infrastructure investments, and thereby facilitating large-scale renewable energy development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sven, for that excellent presentation. The full presentation is available on the ISIS website, where you can look at all the other great debates as well, and you can download the report on the REN21 website. All the links are on the screen at the moment. Sven, before we move to the Q&A, I have one question directed to you, and it's regarding the people involved in your report or the studies, and the question is, how do you choose the experts? Is there a good balance between academics and practitioners in the renewable energy field, or how were these selected?
We actually selected them in close cooperation with REN21, with a team from Christine, and those were actually across the board. There was members of the government, energy experts from companies, utilities. So basically, the whole range of different qualifications. Obviously, you can't always have all, and as we have interviews, or we did interviews in all time zones around the world, and we did not do this interview process alone, but we had several regional partners who actually supported us on that. We covered the whole range, but not always. But maybe the fact that we did not get so many technology answers is by chance that they accidentally did not maybe select too many technology experts. But we basically have I think we had a fair good reflection of the energy debate, so the renewable energy debate and energy debate in the country, in those different countries and regions. And as I see it also in the public debate, people who focus on technology sometimes do not really take part on the public debate, which might be a mistake.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's begin our Q&A session. I'm just going to double check that, Christine, you're still on the line with us, because you're the little...
Yes, absolutely. I'm here.
Great. I was just missing that little symbol, but I think you're on the telephone, which is great. Good, because the first question is for you. And the question is, if we look at the issue from a city perspective, which are the cities at global level with the most ambitious plans and most progress?
We do indeed in the Global Status Report also have a section on cities in the local level and track local policies there. We have some countries, some cities around the world committing to 100% renewable energy targets in Australia, in Canada, and I invite the participant to look at this. We also have this initiative of the Covenant of Mayors, where by now I think 7,200 cities and municipalities have committed to more ambitious targets than their national government. So a lot out there. Clearly, cities are at the forefront, and the Global Status Report also provides information on that.
Thank you. Another question to you, Christine. The question is, how about the developing countries and also oil-dependent countries, their progress in renewable energy? Do you see a particular trend?
Well, what is very interesting to see, I think, is that even countries like Saudi Arabia, that are very oil-rich or fossil fuel-rich, are now investing in renewables and have actually very ambitious programs and start really to move in that field. However, we do see that still about 4 times the amount of money is invested by governments in fossil fuel subsidies than support to renewable energy projects. So there's still a big discrepancy. There is still the need to phase out these fossil fuels because it would effectively make much more sense and would then bring renewables on a fair competitive basis. But overall, we see that countries, even with lots of fossil fuel reserves, move in that direction because clearly with the costs that have come down, they can produce energy, and particularly electricity, at cheaper prices from renewables, and then can export the fossil fuels for other countries who need them for transport and then also other chemical processes.
Thank you. Our next question is for Sven, and the question is, let me just get this correct, yes, how does the assumption regarding electrification of the heating system differ if you ask experts inside and outside Europe? The theory here being that electrification of heating system is stronger pushed or more supported in Europe than outside of Europe.
There are quite a lot of regional differences, and in fact, even within Europe, there is a huge difference. For example, from the Scandinavian, we did not really have sort of interviewees from each European country, obviously, but we see that in Denmark, for example, we had 2 interviews, I think, from Denmark and Norway. That in Denmark, for example, the support of thermal renewables is overwhelming. It's quite huge. While in, let's say, in Norway, electric heating is obviously already in place and therefore more sort of favored. I don't have the regional distribution in terms of North America and Asia in my head. I have to look it up, but I can follow that up. Obviously, in Australia, there is hardly any debate about heating other than industrial process heat.
Thank you very much. Another question to you, Sven, I think following on the previous question about how you choose the experts for your study, is were NGOs involved in the survey?
Yes, we had several NGO members. We had Greenpeace, we had WWF, we had Climate Action Network, we had Friends of the Earth, we had several international renewable energy NGOs as well. So we do have, we had the civil society on board.
Great, thank you. Another question, I think this is for Christine. How do renewable energy initiatives differ in Eastern European countries and Russia compared with those in Western Europe?
Well, effectively, what we see is that there is a lot of potential in everywhere, both in the Eastern European countries and in the Western European ones. We have just launched yesterday a regional status report for the UNECE region, that is Balkan, the Caucasus, and the Asian countries there. So including Russia. I invite the participants to check out ren21.net/regional report and then check there the UNECE report. What in general we see is the European Union countries, they have clear commitments to a share of renewable energy by 2020, and then further on the overall European target for 2030. Very often these policy frameworks are a bit more stringent. In these other places, they all start to have policy targets, and what is now needed is detailed policy frameworks. But we see that there is a lot of appetite also in this region to develop renewables, and I think I'm quite optimistic that we're going to see more and more development in the years to come, just simply because prices of the different technologies have come down so much that renewable technologies are now the most cost competitive option in many jurisdictions.
Thank you. Another question for you, Christine. The solar PV technology prices, they're declining significantly, but how about the other technologies in the chain, for example, converter costs?
Yeah, I mean, overall what we have seen is that the panel prices decline, but also that the overall system costs decline. You also have then different developments for different components, but overall there was a massive decline in cost, and I think the cost still might go down in the years to come, but not at the same speed, because what we see right now is that really there is already competitiveness in many technology segments.
Thank you. I'll keep going through. These questions are coming in really fast, so I'm just reading them as they come in. This one is for Sven. The person first congratulates you on a great presentation, and he asks, in particular in developing countries, what opportunities do you see for the production of renewable technologies, or do you envision them as a mere technology importer?
I think that depends a bit on the technology. For example, wind, if there is a fairly good market potential for wind power in the country, which is if it's a bigger country or in the region, then it's definitely worth starting own manufacturing, maybe not for the core equipment, but for, let's say, for the blades, for the mast, for fundament construction and operation and maintenance. That's definitely the case. For solar photovoltaics, there are many other components than just the module and the inverter, which could be and should be manufactured in the region. And all the other renewable energy technologies, I would say, have still a lot of opportunities to manufacture them in the region, although it is not possible to have an own manufacturing for each country, or maybe a smaller country, for, let's say, solar panels. I don't think that will be competitive, because the manufacturing capacity in the countries who have now the main solar PV manufacturing are fairly large, and it's all economies of scale, and therefore it is pretty difficult to compete with small manufacturing. But I don't think that the train left the station for all technologies. Maybe the train left the station for solar PV modules and to some extent for inverters, but for many others, I think there's still a lot possibilities, and especially the whole system integration aspect that must be regional anyway, and therefore this is a great business opportunity. And the good point on developing countries is that developing countries basically start their energy system from scratch, so they don't have any sort of historical burden to carry, and therefore the system design can be actually tailored straight away in favor of renewables, and that is really an advantage.
Thank you very much. Another question for both of you, maybe an opinion question or what you think about this. So the question is coming in, do we expect a slowdown of renewable energy initiatives in the USA as a result of the Trump government and the recent news about the Paris Agreement? Or are states and cities going to increase their activities now?
Well, maybe I can start and then hand over to Sven. I think it's a bit early to know whether the announcement of President Trump to take the US out of the Paris Agreement is going to slow down investments in the US. The day after this announcement, California has agreed on a 100% renewable electricity target by 2045. We have seen that 5 solar power plants PV with 63 megawatts installed capacity without any subsidies came online in Italy. So we see that these technologies are cost competitive. We see that many US companies have committed to 100% renewable targets, not only because of corporate social responsibility reasons, but because of the fact that this makes economic sense. Again, the US is a federal country, so the different states have a lot of influence, and there are a lot of voices coming from there that they are going to keep up their renewable programs. The other thing also that we need to clearly state is that the Paris Agreement is an international treaty. It will take about 3.5 years to, in fact, to get the US out of that treaty. And by then, there might already be a new US administration. I don't know whether Sven wants to add something.
No, this is exactly what I wanted to say, that according to the UNFCCC website, to get out of Paris takes 3.5 to 4 years, and there is a fair chance that then there will be a different president. Also, renewables are not built in most countries because of environmental awareness, but simply because it's cheaper and quicker to build, and therefore, and also, and that's basically what Christine already said, the US has basically 50 different electricity or energy market regulations. Each state is fairly independent. There's hardly any federal energy policy in the US, and therefore I don't really expect any slowdown. It might slow down the growth, but I actually do not believe that the market in the US will actually shrink.
Thank you very much. We're receiving lots of comments and feedback to thank you both for your opinions and your feedback on that question. Last question, because we only have 3 minutes left and running out of time. So the last question is for Christine. Given that despite the rapid progress in renewable energy deployment in 2016, are we still behind the Paris Agreement targets, and what general changes must be made in order to meet these targets?
Yes, one of the things that the announcement of President Trump has caused was an even stronger statement of many countries, all the other G7 leaders, but also China, India, and many others, that they're going to stick to the Paris Agreement. and that's, I mean, what I have, and that's, I think, what we're going to see in the years to come. We're going to see more cooperation between Europe and between China, Europe and China, and Europe and India, etc., etc. We are making progress. However, we also know that we need to speed up development if we are ready to reach these targets that we've agreed in Paris. And today we have talked a lot about the supply side, and I think it's very important to make more efforts in making sure that our energy systems are going to become more flexible, and we give sector coupling more thoughts. But I think what is also very important is that we look on the demand side. So we have not talked today at all about energy efficiency, but clearly this goes hand in hand, and the kilowatt hour that is not consumed is the cleanest one. So there needs to be further progress in that area. We need to speed up policy, but also deployment in the field of heating and cooling, and in the field of transport, deployment of renewables. And we basically need to just increase the speed with which this transition is happening.
Thank you very much, Christine. And with that, we're going to close the Q&A session and end the webinar now. Before we end the webinar, I'd like to say thank you very much to our expert panelist speakers for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today, for taking the time to present in this webinar. To our audience, I hope you all enjoyed it. I thought it was a fantastic webinar. We got to answer a lot of questions, which is great. To contact the panelist speakers for further information on their reports, please see their own contact details in their presentations, which are available on the ISIS website. You all have the link for that. The next ISIS webinar will take place on the 6th of July and will focus on solar heating for industrial process. We welcome you all to join us again for that webinar. You may view today's webinar recording in a couple of hours on the ISIS website and also the YouTube channel. And as mentioned before, ISIS members, you guys can log into the website and watch all the webinar recordings and also view the presentations. If you have comments or feedback, we welcome you to share this with us so that we can continue to improve our webinar series for you. Please participate in the survey or send your feedback directly to public.relations@isis.org. With that, I'd like to close the webinar, wishing you all a great day, evening, morning, whatever time it is in your part of the world. Thank you very much.